Remove this plastic cover. It has 3 10mm bolts, 2 on this side, 1 on this side. Use a flat-bladed screwdriver to loosen the hose clamp, or use an 8mm socket and ratchet. I find that's a little easier, it doesn't slip off. I'm going to pull this hose out of here, turn that to the side, unclip this connector here, place that aside, pull the intake tube off of the throttle body. There's another vacuum hose down here, pull that off. Lift the intake off. It's on rubber mounts. One more connector. Push the lock tab in, pull it apart, place the intake aside. Down here is the auto tensioner. That's what gives tension to the belt. There is a square opening here that is for a 1/2-inch driver or breaker bar. So what I'm going to do is take this end of the breaker bar, put it into that opening, and then I'll pull it to the driver's side to relieve tension from the belt, and I can pull it off the pulleys. It's a little tricky to get in here. Got it in there, I'm just going to push it down to the driver's side. Belt is loose, I can just lift it off. I can relieve the tension, pull my breaker bar out. Feed the belt off of all the pulleys. Remove the serpentine belt. Before I remove any of the power steering lines, I'm going to drain off the fluid in the reservoir so there's less fluid to drain out of the lines when I disconnect them from the pump. And I'm just using a fluid transfer, like a suction gun, and just dispose of it properly. Once you've drained it, replace the cap so nothing falls in there. Raise and support your vehicle. If it's easier, you can take your wheel off. Ours, we've just turned the wheel. You need to remove this high pressure line from the steering box. Our vehicle here has like a 3-inch body lift, so there's quite a bit of space here. On a stock vehicle, you may be working through this opening and you can pull the clips and pull this rubber out of the way to get to it. And spray some rust penetrant on it. I can take a 14mm line wrench to remove the pressure line from the top of the steering box. The line wrench is more closed than a regular open wrench. It gives you a better grip on a line fastener. That actually loosened up pretty well. Just have to work around the fan here. One end contacts the fan a little bit, but if you spin the wrench between the fan blades, you've got enough space. Before you pull this off completely, have a drain pan ready to catch any leaking power steering fluid. Now I've let the majority of the extra fluid drip out of here. I'm just going to take an extra latex glove I have, just put it over it, and a zip tie. This way it'll keep some of the fluid contained while I get the power steering pump out. I'm going to start by removing the 2 lower bolts from the power steering pump. There's one in here and then one here. I'm just going to use some brake parts cleaner to clean some of the grime off so I can see the bolt heads better. I'm going to start with the back one. It's 10 millimeter. Put quite a bit of force on that to undo it, and with a little short 10 millimeter wrench, it's kind of difficult, but there's not much else you can get in there. Now that they're broken loose, I'm going to use a 10 millimeter ratcheting wrench. Try to speed this up a bit. Those are actually pretty loose. I can move them out by hand. I'm going to leave them in there for now. I need to go up to the top part of the pump and get the top 2 bolts. I also need to undo the low pressure return line. Let's get a squeeze clamp here. I'm going to do that now. I'm going to undo this clamp here in the low pressure hose. Just going to use some slip joint pliers. That's better. Reach in and push this up. Just slide it up the hose. That should be off of the neck on the power steering pump. Now we're going to lift it up. You're going to want to have a drain pan ready. Some fluid will pour out of here. Oh, not too much actually, because we drained a lot out earlier. So that's good. I'm just going to push the hose aside right here. I'm going to take some more brake parts cleaner and spray up in here and try to clean off the bolts, the upper bolts. So the top bolts are really hard to see, but they are pretty much opposite of the bottom ones. There's 2 in the top and then 2 in the bottom, and just go on the opposite side and find them, but they're very hard to see from underneath the vehicle. I'm going to use a long 1/4 inch drive extension and a 10 millimeter socket and go in from the side here. And I'm working on the rearmost top bolt. Get that one broken free. And work on the front one. Get that one free. Chip and grab it. Here's one of the top bolts. You can see how long they are. They go through the power steering pump and then into the block. Pump is now loose. It's only being held in by the bottom bolts, which are pretty much finger tight. You might have to lift up on it. Just thread them out. This one will be a bit tricky because the high pressure line is on the other side of it. So I'm gonna have to unthread this one. I may need to put a wrench in there. And you'll actually unthread it and move it out and the pump all at once. Now it's time to feed the power steering pump out of the engine compartment. The pulley on this power steering pump is a press-on fit. We're going to use a power steering pulley puller to remove it. I'm going to spray some rust penetrant in here first. You could do this in the vehicle, but we're going to show you outside of the car because it's easier to see. I'm going to take my pick and clean out any debris. This way, as it gets pulled off, it should come off a little bit smoother. So I've tried to clean out as much as the debris that's just been stuck in here over the years as I could. I'm going to spray some more rust penetrant in here. Take these are part of our pulley tool. They've got sort of a narrow end and a wider part. Put the wider part underneath. There's a lip on here. Actually, I will make sure that it is nice and clean. Place our tool underneath the lip. Take the other part of the tool. This part is going to fit with these puller pieces over it, and then it's going to thread down and push against the shaft that the pulley is on, and hopefully push it off easily. Try to center it in here. There's a locking ring that goes over. I'm just going to thread this up to bring tension on it. Spray a little bit of oil on here to help it move. Take the appropriate wrenches that fit the puller and a socket. That is pushing it off of the power steering pump. Now it's free. So screw our special tool. Lift our pulley off. I'm just going to carefully clean the dirt and debris away from the seal. Just inspect it. It doesn't look like it's leaking. I've cleaned our pump up. Now I need to press our pulley onto here. I'm going to use a little bit of light oil just to aid in lubrication as this goes on. Get it set up. Use a pulley installing tool. It threads into the pump shaft. Put this down. Use the appropriate size wrenches for your tool. It's getting tighter. I'm just going to brace the pulley with a pry bar. There's a line on the pump shaft. We can see where the pulley has been riding. I'm going to tighten it until it matches up with that line. The other way to tell that this is seated properly is the pinion shaft is now flush with the top of the pulley. Power steering pump out of the vehicle. You can see where the bolt holes are. There's two in the top, two in the bottom. This one here we're no longer going to use. We can omit it according to the service information. So we're only going to put a bolt in here and the two top ones. I'm going to leave this little glove finger that I have zip tied on here. This is on the low pressure return. I'm going to cut it off when I've got it in the vehicle, but for now I'm going to leave it on there in case there's any fluid in there. It doesn't leak everywhere when I'm trying to move the pump around. This line is going to come to the front, so I'm just going to spin it around. I'm going to put the bolts sort of right here where I can reach them. pump up in here. On the other side of the oil filter lines. Okay. There are two dowels on the back of the pump. There's one in this bottom hole and one in the top one. They're going to fit into the engine block. You have to just move your arms around. This way. Alright, so that fit in real nice. Take one of the bolts, capture the bottom one. Feed in the top ones. I'm using a 10mm socket and a long extension for the top bolts. Finish tighten the rear one. Now I'm going to finish tightening the other top one. This bottom one's hard to reach with a socket and ratchet, so I'm using a ratcheting wrench, but first I'm going to tighten it down, finger tight. And I'm just going to bring it down tight. Next step will be to route your line to the top of the power steering box. Install the power steering pressure line into the top of the power steering box. You really can't see the hole that it needs to go into, but here's the yellow cap I put on here to protect the O-ring while I was installing it. I'm going to pull the yellow cap off. Make sure your O-ring's still in place. Feed this into the opening. I have to wiggle the line around a bit to get it to fit right. Just going to thread it in by hand to get it started. With the thread started by hand, I can take a 14mm line wrench and start to tighten it down. Just have to move the fan a little bit, kind of swing the wrench through the fan blades. And I'm going to cut off the rubber glove finger I put over the return hose nipple on the power steering pump. I should reach up with some side cutters. Might be easier if I spin the zip tie around to the other side. Okay, pull that latex piece off. Reach in and put the return line back on. Slide right over. I'll get my other pliers. Install the clamp. There it is. Okay, clamp is in place. Take our dry belt. I'm going to feed it down through the idler pulley and the tensioner. Trying to get it around the AC pulley first. I'm going to take the part of this, half of this belt, and loop it around our fan. Then I'm going to go down and around the crank pulley. Now I've got it looped around the power steering pump pulley. With the belt routed, it goes down around the AC compressor, up through the idler and tensioner, down and around the crankshaft, up and over the fan, down and around the power steering pump. And then the very last thing will be the alternator on the top, because I can reach it. So I'm going to relieve the tension from the auto tensioner and pull the belt up over the alternator pulley. So using the 1/2-inch breaker bar, putting it into the 1/2-inch opening in the auto tensioner. Pulling to the driver's side of the vehicle. Making sure that I've got all the belts on on the pulleys. And we'll let it go. Pull the breaker bar out so the belt is installed. Reinstall the intake tube. Push that over the throttle body. Plug in the connector that was over here. Push this down into the little rubber holders. Reinstall this connector. Reattach the vent hose here. Use an 8mm socket or flat bladed screwdriver. Tighten the hose clamp. This little vacuum intake box into here. And reinstall the cover. Goes over the throttle body. Reinstall the 10mm bolts. 10mm socket and ratchet. Refill the power steering fluid reservoir with the approved power steering fluid to the max fill level. Use a funnel. You're going to start the truck up. Move the wheel to the right and the left repeatedly until any power steering line goes away and the air is bled from the system. Check the fluid level in the reservoir. You may need to add more. Bring it up to the max fill level. And then replace the cap. And the install is complete.
Thanks for watching. Visit us at oneauto.com for quality auto parts, fast and free shipping, and the best customer service in the industry.